People from small towns or cities, what is your local unsolved crime / mystery / etc.? Story 1. I'm from a small town in rural America, so small we have more nature than town. Like many small towns, we rarely have major crimes committed. The worst we have is crimes involving illicit substances. However, one event still haunts those that were alive for it, and to us younger generation, our parents used to warn us. The mysterious death of Nathan. I still remember the day. After a visitation day with my dad, he brought me home. My parents, who were divorced, were going through their old yearbooks. My father pointed to a picture of Nathan and said, "Remember that guy? Hate that he took his own life." My mother quickly fired back, "No, remember they never figure it." My father's eyes got big and he quickly replied, "That's right, I forgot about that." Naturally, as someone who has always been interested in unsolved mysteries and crimes, I asked what they meant. They explained. The event happened on August 21st, 1989. Nathan was a popular and funny teenager with two parents that owned a popular store in my small town. On a Friday, after school, Nathan told his father he was going hunting. This was not unusual for Nathan, since hunting was one of his biggest hobbies and his family owned a 122 acres property, which came in handy for an outdoors guy like Nathan. Nathan never stayed out past 7 when he went hunting. This was a strict rule by his parents. When Nathan had not returned home on time, his father, Nathan's father, knew something wasn't right. Nathan's father quickly set out to find him, thinking Nathan simply ignored his curfew. It wasn't long before his father found a horrific sight. Laying on the ground was the dead body of his son with a gunshot wound to the head. Now this is where the story really becomes mysterious and uneasy for people in my town. After finding their son, the family called the police and the county sheriff, Sheriff Miller. Unlike most sheriffs, who dedicate their life to serving justice and bringing closure to families, Miller did not in this case. In fact, he did the very opposite. In less than 24 hours of Nathan's death, without any investigation, only going to the scene of the crime one time, without searching the area one time, and even before an autopsy had began, he ruled Nathan's death an accident, but later ruled it a suicide. Something the coroner easily and quickly agreed to rule as well. Sheriff Miller's theory was that Nathan decided to take his own life and picked his favorite place, the woods, to do it. Everyone who knew Nathan, family, friends, and even school acquaintances, didn't buy it. Nathan loved the simple life and his family too much to take his own life. There was also many unusual evidence and factors of his death that there is no way they were innocently missed. The bullet that shot Nathan in the head was missing. His wallet was empty, and all of his money and his ID was missing. Also, Nathan's had a 1-inch cut on his head, which made no sense for a suicide. The sheriff claimed the cut was most likely from Nathan's head hitting a tree root when his body fell after he took his own life. There was no way this was true based on the location his body was found. It is also impossible for him to have shot himself with a shotgun and cut his head at the same time. Without any help from the town police, his family did their own investigation, and many more puzzling discoveries were found. Nathan's father found what he believed was the missing bullet slightly close where Nathan's body had been found, and it seemed like someone tired to bury it. Nathan's father also realized the bullet didn't match bullets in Nathan's gun. When they had the bullet looked at, the police claimed it was not proof enough, and when it was returned to the family, they claimed the police gave them a different bullet. Not long after, his father found a homemade radio device a friend of the family called a former Drug Enforcement Administration agent. Nathan's father stated, the former Drug Enforcement Administration agent said that this was a type of device that people supplying illicit substances use to signal aircrafts by sending out a low-range signal for the proper alignment to drop a shipment of illicit substances. Not long after this discovery, Nathan's mother claimed she was confronted by a mysterious man. The man got her alone with him to talk by telling her he had something to say about her son. She stated he told her, "Don't open this case up. You have other children. I suggest you raise them for your own good. You'll never find the person that harmed your son." Nathan's mother tired to talk to him more, but he... Story 2. When I was a teenager, there was a spate of crude graffiti in my quiet, boring town of under 30,000 people. It was all obviously being done by the same person, as all the explicit drawings were drawn in a very unique style, and they were all signed graffiti artist with the Z's written in a distinctive way. There didn't seem to be any pattern of where they would strike either. Every week or so, a new one would appear. On the wall outside the social club, in the highway underpass, inside the fish and chip shop toilet, etc. It got to a point where kids at school would keep track of where the latest graffiti artist had appeared, and it would be all anyone could talk about. In a way, they were the proto-Banksy. Everyone wanted to know their true identity, including the police. Since our town had practically no crime other than the odd stolen bicycle, the cops had the time and resources to come down hard on this one. It was, and still is, a solidly conservative town, so no doubt they were under pressure too from the local council to quickly address this shocking moral depravity and prevent the appearance of further large, stylized, explicit drawings around town. They went around the schools, including the elementary/primaries, and interviewed bunches of kids looking for any clues that might lead them to the mysterious graffiti artist. Supposedly, they checked the school registration books and paid particular attention to any kid who had a name that might reasonably lead to a nickname of graffiti artist. And we all swore that we saw more police cars driving around than usual that summer, looking to catch the mystery artist in the act. As far as I know, they never did get him or her. The graffiti just stopped appearing as suddenly as it started. Nor did we kids ever find out who it was. There were tons of theories, of course, with a lot of suspicion falling on a kid called Chris in the year above me, because apparently he liked to doodle explicit drawings on his notebooks. However, he was subsequently cleared by some girl called Diana who sat next to him in French, and she sneaked a peek at his doodles one day, and she reported that the details of Chris's explicit sketches were intrinsically different from that of graffiti artists and therefore not a match. Story 3. I grew up in a small town of about 2,500. When I was a sophomore in high school, someone broke into the school one night and planted a bunch of pipe bombs. A couple of them actually went off and burned the gym and several classrooms down. They searched the school and found the other unexploded bombs. This happened in the 1980s. They never caught who did it. Most people believe it was a student at the school, which means there is a very good chance one of my fellow classmates is still out there, an arsonist who got away with it. Story 4. Allenstown, New Hampshire. The Bear Brook Murders. Not exactly my hometown, currently, but I did spend my childhood growing up in that very park where the barrels were found. The barrels were found, one in 1985, and one in 2000 in a trailer park inside of Bear Brook State Park, called Bear Brook Gardens. They were found 30 to 40 yards behind a trailer in that neighborhood. I did not live in that neighborhood in particular, but in another which was about 1 mile up the street called Bear Brook Villa. We had friends from the gardens and we hung out there all the time. Surprisingly, I didn't know anything about any of this until later on in 2005-06. Considering the first barrel was found in 1985, when I was barely 3 years old, you'd think we would have heard something. Being so very close and everything, but we didn't. Not sure if the authorities were keeping it on the hush or what. For the past 12+ years, I have always wondered if I knew any of these girls, considering I may have been in similar age range. Or, God forbid, I knew who did it and who put them there. After all, I can say this. Whoever did it, whom they believe they now know, knew that area extremely well. It was an area inside a neighborhood that was inside a trailer park, that was 5 miles inside a huge state park. Think about that for a minute. Of course, whoever it was knew what they were doing and where they were going. Either someone from the park or someone who had friends/relatives in the park. Something I did always wonder was why there. If you knew the park well like I do, then you'd understand. It was huge. There were back roads and dirt roads that forked off several times over and over again. Very easy place to get lost in. And after only a couple miles, it's pure forest. Nothing around within range, like something you'd see on a movie like Wrong Turn, where all you have to do is drive for 3 minutes and suddenly you're in the middle of nowhere where no one could ever hear you scream and nowhere to run to. Anyways, I'm glad they finally were able to identify 3 of the 4 girls and most likely who the perpetrator was, now deceased unfortunately. Laureen Ron, Manchester, New Hampshire. Probably a story most are familiar with if you're into unsolved disappearances. I spent my high school years in Manchester. Same high school a famous comedian went to. Woohoo! Again, I never heard about this case until recently. Of course, there was no internet back then like there is today. Late 90s, very early 00s. There was the internet, but it was slow and limited. Anyway, Laura was a 14-year-old girl. She had just turned 14 2 weeks before, whose mother had gone away for the night with her boyfriend, leaving Laura home alone. She ended up having two friends over, her best friend, female, and another friend who was more of an acquaintance who lived nearby, male. I refer to them as male and female because their names were never released to the public due to them being minors at the time. Long story short, she and her friends were drinking thanks to the male bringing over beer. According to the female friend, as it was getting late, they apparently thought they had heard someone walking up the stairs of the apartment building, and the male friend took off out the back door. Eventually, the two girls went to bed, with Laura taking the couch and her friend taking her bed. This is where it gets weird. All of the light bulbs in the hallway were unscrewed enough for the lights to be out. The back door was not only unlocked, but it was open a little. When Laura's mother got home, she noticed this and shut the door, checked to see if Laura was in bed, and then went to bed herself. Only problem was that it wasn't Laura in her bed, it was her friend. Her mother couldn't sleep and felt that something was wrong, so she got up and went in to talk to Laura and realized it wasn't her. When she asked the friend where Laura was, she said, "On the couch." But she wasn't. She was nowhere to be found. It gets a little crazy and complicated from here, involving a doctor out in California and an adult film actress, along with several phone calls from both California and locally. But I'm not going to get into that because it would take me 2 hours to explain. Besides, I honestly don't think any of that had anything at all to do with her disappearance. I personally believe that Laura's male friend, who was not only much older. Story 5. So this is not exactly unsolved, just unprosecuted. A school incident by a boy about 16 years old resulted in a girl's death and wounded another before he was stopped. The boy had harmed his mother and his dog before coming to the school that day. This was about a year before the Columbine incident. The boy was quickly prosecuted and dispensed with forever into the state prison system. The reporters closely covering this case were deeply troubled that only this boy was prosecuted. The boy's best friend, in quotes, because nobody needs a friend like this, had basically egged him on to this and helped prepare him to do it for months. The shooter himself was the different kind of high school kid. Not very mature, didn't fit in, not adept at conversing or relating with people. Few friends, somewhat behind his peers in schoolwork. The best friend was a more normal-seeming kid, well socialized but with a reputation for using others for his own ends, without much regard for anyone else. The best friend had started about a year prior to the incident overwhelming this kid with attention, apparently for the purpose of manipulating the kid at will. Best friend had got him a firearm, showed him how to use it, and they practiced shooting at targets out in a field somewhere. The best friend also worked on the kid's dissatisfaction with his mother and home situation. Nothing especially bad about it, just normal teenager angst. And the kid's anxiety over his inability to connect with other students, especially girls he liked. The manipulative friend had also worked on desensitizing the eventual shooter to any empathy for anyone else. Friend even got him to mistreat his beloved dog. Some people thought that until this new best friend stepped in, due to his poor social skills, the dog had actually been the kid's best friend. A lot of what they did was reflective of things the Columbine perpetrators did in a long preparation cycle. Even though this all happened in a different part of the country about a year before the Columbine incident, all during the time the two boys were preparing for this day, it was months. The friend pretended that he was also going to be part of the incident as well. They were going to do it together. The friend only backed out of the plan that morning with some excuse, but he pressured the boy to go through with it anyway. To follow the plan to harm his mother, single parent and dog, then go to the school and harm a particular girl, he did, and anyone else he could manage to shoot. The two boys were on the phone with each other throughout. The investigators and prosecutors were well aware of the friend and dug into his role. One reporter wrote an extensive investigative newspaper article about the friend. It was clear that this reporter thought that, without the best friend, the shooter would never have done what he did. The shooter wasn't organized or purposeful enough, and he didn't really have a reason. But in the end, the prosecutors felt that they could not make a legal case against the best friend for the deaths. So the best friend skated. Even though those who knew the whole story knew that without the best friend there would have been no incident. Story 6. Town next 2 hours has one. Take it with some salt, because no official reporting was done on it. In the early 2000s, a kid took his own life using a firearm, and then his body was run over by a train with a plow attachment. The gun wasn't found, and his suicide note was written on a typewriter. Here's the thing. He had recently started dating a girl he liked for years. His parents recently inherited a good amount of money from his maternal grandfather's estate and bought him a car, and he was doing well in school, even winning a few records for the district track team. He was reported by all of his friends to be very happy up until a week before the incident. His dad is a local cop, and it's believed his gun was the one used because it, too, could not be found and wasn't in his drawer. The local papers didn't report on it, and the coroner ruled it a suicide by gunshot to the head within a few hours of receiving remains severely damaged by the train. His half-brother from Dad's first marriage, who moved out at 18, was mid-20s when this happened, immediately started posting on forums accusing his dad, who was apparently an abusive drunk, of harming him. He made a MySpace for it, digging into everything, and was working on the theory that his brother caught the dad cheating. The current wife is the woman he cheated on the first son's mom with, and threatened to tell. His dad, afraid of losing out on that inheritance, harmed him and made it look like a suicide. He then accused the police of covering it up to protect a cop. Some of the evidence: he's cheated before. He was an abusive person when drunk. The note was written on the typewriter on a shelf in the dad's room. The kid made plans for the following weekend. The kid's girlfriend said he blew off a date with her because he needed to see his dad. The coroner literally called it in just a few hours from a body severely damaged by a train with a snowplow. The gun was never found. The only reporter to dig into it at all was reassigned to a much better story that involved paid travel. To add a layer, the older son has documents showing his father. Story 7. Oh geez, I live in a large city, so there are plenty of unsolved mysteries here. The one that really sticks out for me is the unsolved cases involving the deaths of Eva and Holly back in August 1990. Holly was about my age, and there were reported sightings of her all over when she was missing, and because her parents were middle class and her father was in the Air Force, it was big news. Her case is still open. Eva's is not, though the suspects in her case were either no-billed or had the case dropped because of a questionable confession. It's considered a closed case. The other one that gets to me is the case of Lila. It makes me so angry to consider it. She went missing in April 1990, and her sister eventually had a billboard put up alongside the freeway, offering a reward for her discovery. The police did essentially nothing to find her. Because she was spotted in the company of a man, they decided she had simply left her family. She was an adult. Her remains were discovered in a nearby county almost a month later and sent back to San Antonio for autopsy by renowned medical examiner Dr. Miles, the man who quite literally wrote the book on forensic pathology. In spite of this, she was not at the time identified and was buried as a Jane Doe. She was finally identified in 2011 and exhumed so her family could bury her, at which time it was discovered that she wasn't actually buried in the grave they thought she was in. There was a man in that grave. They cannot locate her grave, nor any indication she was buried at all. It's one more kick in the teeth for her family. The Department of Public Safety does have her listed as a cold case, but things were handled extremely poorly by everyone involved at the time, so there's essentially zero chance of her case ever being solved. Story 8. I live in a small town of less than 1,000 people. This happened years ago, late 80s or early 90s maybe, but people still talk about it somewhat. A popular guy in town owned the local bar, had a fight with his wife, and she ends up leaving supposedly to go to her family in Canada. There's a snowstorm that night, and the next day her car is found parked on a side road in town less than 2 miles from their house. She is not in the car, and there is no trace of her anywhere in the area. Police search the area, still find nothing. I remember hearing there was some effort to find her family and reach out, but I think they had some trouble locating them back then. The hopeful conclusion seemed to be that she had asked her family to come pick her up, she left in their car, and no one heard from her again. Flash forward to early 2000s. There's a town depot here where there's a sand pit, and the town parks its plow trucks. A couple of guys from a road crew are tossing around a frisbee, which gets thrown into the woods. One of them goes back to retrieve it and comes out proudly announcing, "Look at this jawbone I just found." That's not from a deer. Deer don't have fillings. Sure enough, it was linked to her. State police brought in specialized search dogs to check the area and eventually located additional evidence spread out across the site. Story 9. Last year, there was a man who was harmed, and over the course of a month or two, different parts of his remains were discovered in various spots around the city. No one has ever been arrested, no one knows exactly how he died or why, and eventually, no further discoveries were made. The police and news media stayed fairly quiet about it, which led to many rumors spreading in the community. Story 10. This is my first post, so please be patient if I make some mistakes. I've been a long-time reader here, but I finally found something I feel I could share. To give some context, I live near the intersection of 3 different towns: Wadsworth, Doylestown, and Rittman. Last month, a deceased person was found in Doylestown, just a short drive from where I live. While looking into that case, I came across something that had happened years earlier in Rittman. In 2011, when I was about 10 or 11, a hunter came across human remains in a wooded area on Morton Saltco's property. The clothing had deteriorated, and investigators couldn't initially determine whether the remains belonged to a man or a woman. A few weeks later, more remains and some clothing were located at the same site. Over time, investigators noticed the name John stamped inside the waistband of the pants. That name was shared in local newspapers, and a family recognized it as belonging to their brother-in-law, who had been missing since the 1960s. DNA testing was initially inconclusive due to an error, but later confirmed that the remains were indeed John, who had disappeared in 1967. Even with the identification, authorities never officially determined whether his death was accidental, a case of foul play, or something else. Story 11. There have been several troubling cases in my old town over the past few years. A few years ago, a police officer was killed around 3 a.m. on a local highway while trying to clear a branch from the road. Not long after, a teacher and her teenage daughter lost their lives in their home. About 2 years ago, a mother disappeared and has not been seen since. Her car was later found abandoned on the highway with her belongings still inside. Authorities considered her boyfriend a person of interest, and his brother, who was a police officer, resigned after facing allegations of trying to interfere with the case. To this day, no one has been charged. Later, the missing woman's father was injured in a hunting incident under unclear circumstances. Rumors have circulated about who may be responsible, but nothing has been confirmed. The town has changed drastically over the past decade, with rising substance activity and crime harming the community. Some residents even speculate about possible involvement of organized crime, though nothing has been proven. Story 12. My wife's grandmother went missing from her ranch home in Snowflake, Arizona. There were no signs of a struggle. Her bowl of cereal was half-eaten, nothing was missing from the house, and her car was still parked outside. She was a widow, very close to her family, and lived on more than 10 acres of land. Some people speculated that, because she was a mail carrier and sometimes delivered to a rough part of town known for substance activity, she might have encountered something dangerous. But no one knows for sure. Despite the attention the case received in such a small, rural, predominantly Mormon community, there were no leads. It has been over 15 years now, and the most difficult part for my wife and her family is the lack of closure. It's possible the truth may never be known. Story 13. I'm not from a small town per se, but I live in Orange County, California, and there is one case that has always stayed with me. It's an unsolved double homicide. In 1984, at a small hotel near Disneyland, a 25-year-old single mother and her 5-year-old daughter were found shot and killed. The child was discovered in her bed, still holding her Minnie Mouse doll. Authorities reported no evidence of sexual assault, and as far as I know, the case has never been solved. Their names were Pamela and her daughter Amy. Originally from Seattle, Pamela had worked for months to save for this trip with her daughter. I work in government and have tried to research the case, but I've only been able to find the original articles from when it happened. As a single mom of a 5-year-old girl myself, I deeply hope that someone will solve this case one day. Story 15. Years ago, a body was found in our local cemetery. It was a young woman who had been strangled. No one knew who she was, and to this day, her identity remains unknown. The town is tiny, everyone knows everyone, but no one recognized her. Police thought she might have been a hitchhiker or from out of town, but there were no missing persons reports that matched. The case went cold fast because there were no leads, no wallet, no jewelry, nothing. People still talk about it, especially around Halloween, but it's like she just appeared and died there without a trace. It's eerie how something like that can happen in a place where nothing ever does. Story 16. In the 1990s, I went to elementary school with Karen, an 8-year-old girl who was taken from her home while she was sleeping. Her younger sister, aged 3, was also present. At the time, the girl's mother faced community suspicion due to her personal struggles, but she was not responsible for the disappearance. In 2015, Karen's neighbor Arthur was arrested and convicted for his involvement in her disappearance and other crimes. Evidence linked him to the case. In 2019, 2 years after being sentenced to life in prison, Arthur died in prison under violent circumstances. Story 17. This occurred outside of town. There was a woman living alone who faced personal struggles and had lost custody of her children. She did not have stable employment, and it took some time for anyone to notice her absence. She was later found dead. She had suffered serious injuries and had been deceased for some time before being discovered. The autopsy indicated that her injuries were not immediately fatal, and she might have survived if found earlier. The man known to have been her boyfriend was tracked down. Initially, he claimed they had broken up, but he later acknowledged an altercation that resulted in her injuries. He faced a reduced manslaughter charge and was ultimately acquitted. The case drew criticism for the lack of timely intervention and support. Story 18. I lived in the town next to where this happened, and our Girl Scout troop was extremely cautious because of it. We only camped twice. Once on private property a good distance away, under supervision the whole time, and another time at an official campground with patrols. When I was in high school, my mom worked at a nearby Denny's and got written up after confronting a man who was widely suspected of wrongdoing at the time. She told him to leave promptly. Around 1997-98, when I was in middle school, our Girl Scout troop visited a pool nearby. One of the moms warned us not to go beyond the chain-link fence surrounding it, because a violent incident had occurred there. My sister, a few other girls, and I decided not to swim, because the water looked unclean. We stayed near the fence, feeling very uneasy and worried about encountering something unexpected. We told our grandmother how uncomfortable we were, and she promised we would not have to return, though we had gone anyway. The pool eventually shut down, and nobody seemed upset by this. When I later looked at a map, the only pool that appeared was now destroyed, right in the middle of the campground. The road leading to it was overgrown, and the ruins of the main cabin and pool were all that remained. My sister remembered this as well, and she was equally unsettled when I asked about it years later. Story 19. My ex-girlfriend, who was 4.5 years older than me, told me about this 6 years ago. She was actually at the party with her that night, and knew her well. The weirdest part of my story, though, is that she told me this as we walked along Potomac waiting for a breakfast table at the doorstop. We wandered into this bookshop and browsed while she filled me in on the details. Later that night, I Googled the case because I was curious about the details, and I found another unsolved case in Dormont that occurred in that bookstore. Somewhere around 2007, I believe. Edit. The detail about her being older than me was to point out why I didn't remember this event. I would have been a punk freshman in high school not paying attention to news. Story 20. This happened in my small hometown in rural Kentucky back in the early 2000s. There was a local farmer named Elias, who owned a large plot of land on the outskirts of town. He was known as a bit of a recluse, but friendly enough when you ran into him at the general store. One morning, his neighbor noticed his truck parked oddly in the driveway and went to check on him. The front door was ajar, and inside, Elias was found dead on his kitchen floor with multiple stab wounds. The house wasn't ransacked, no valuables missing, no signs of forced entry. It looked like he knew his attacker. The police investigated, but there were no fingerprints, no DNA evidence that didn't belong to Elias, and no weapon found. The only odd thing was a half-eaten apple on the table, with bite marks that didn't match Elias's dental records. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said it was a dispute over land with another farmer, others thought it was related to old family feuds from generations back. Elias had no immediate family left, just distant relatives who lived out of state and had alibis. Years later, a hiker found a rusted knife in the woods about a mile from the farm, but testing showed no blood or usable prints. The case is still open, and every now and then, someone claims to have seen a stranger lurking around the abandoned property. It's one of those things that makes you lock your doors a little tighter at night, in a town where everyone knows everyone. Or so we thought. Story 21. In the late 1970s, in my small coastal town in Oregon, there was the case of the Phantom Fisherman. A series of boats started disappearing from the harbor overnight, not stolen for parts or resale. They were found adrift miles out at sea, empty, with no signs of struggle. The first one belonged to Old Man Harris, who was never seen again. Then 2 more over the next month, both owners missing. The Coast Guard searched, but no bodies, no wreckage. Locals whispered about a ghost ship, or some curse from the old lighthouse that had burned down decades earlier. The police thought it might be foul play, perhaps a rival fishing operation, but no evidence pointed anywhere. One boat had a single clue, a wet footprint on the deck that didn't match the owner's shoe size. Investigations led to nothing, no suspects, no motives. The disappearances stopped as suddenly as they started after the third boat. To this day, no one knows if the men drowned, were taken, or if it was something more sinister. The harbor still feels eerie on foggy nights, and some fishermen refuse to go out alone. Story 22. Growing up in a tiny mining town in West Virginia, the big mystery was the collapse of the old Silver Creek mine in 1952. Officially, it was an accident. Structural failure harmed 12 miners. But my grandfather, who worked there but called in sick that day, always said it was no accident. There were rumors of sabotage because the mine owner was in debt and insured heavily. Days before, strange men were seen around the entrance, and one miner reported hearing explosions deeper than usual. The investigation was quick. The company paid out minimal compensation, and the site was sealed. But in the 1980s, when they reopened part of it for tours, workers found a hidden chamber with old dynamite crates that didn't match the mine's inventory. No serial numbers, no traces. Families of the victims pushed for a new inquiry, but it went nowhere. Too much time had passed, records lost. Some think it was union busting gone wrong, others insurance fraud. The town built a memorial, but the truth is buried deeper than those men. Story 23. About 10 years ago in my Midwest small town, a high school teacher vanished after a football game. Ms. Roberts was last seen leaving the stadium alone, her car found the next day in a ditch off a back road, keys in the ignition, purse inside. No blood, no struggle. She had no enemies, happy marriage, 2 kids. The husband was cleared early on. Searches turned up nothing. Not even her phone, which pinged a tower 50 miles away before going dead. Theories ranged from abduction by a student, she was popular, to running away, but her bank accounts were untouched. A year later, a hunter found her scarf in the woods, miles from the car, but no other clues. The case made national news briefly, but faded. Locals still speculate. Maybe she saw something she shouldn't have at the game, like a shady transaction in the parking lot. The family offers a reward, but it's cold now. It's sad. Her classroom is a memorial of sorts. Story 24. In the 1990s, my hometown in upstate New York had the shadow burglaries. Homes were broken into, but nothing valuable taken, just personal items like photos, letters, a lock of hair. Victims felt watched for weeks before. No fingerprints, no forced entry, always unlocked doors or windows, like the burglar knew routines. It hit about 15 houses over 2 years, then stopped. Police thought it was a stalker, but no connections between victims. One had a security camera that caught a shadowy figure, too grainy to ID. Rumors of a former resident who was institutionalized returning for revenge. A suspect was questioned, a janitor with access to keys, but alibi checked out. The case is unsolved, and some victims moved away. It's creepy thinking someone out there has pieces of our lives. Less than end_censored greater than